Chaldean Grammar, Chapter 6, the future tense and the perfect tenses. So now that you know the subjunctive and you know the present tense, and we went over a kind of just a general idea of how verbs work, let's just kind of build on that. We're going to talk about the future tense and the perfect tenses right now. So we're just going to just learn more and more ways to make a verb. So recall that the present tense is constructed by taking the basic subjunctive and adding a kop at the beginning of the word, the kop being the present, quote, tense indicator. A lot of the verbs are going to work in the same way. So similarly, the future tense is made by adding its own tense indicator, the particle bid, onto the beginning of the subjunctive. So a lot of these verbal systems are going to be built the same way. You're going to take the subjunctive, which is kind of the root, the base verb, and you're going to put something on it to indicate a different tense. So to make the present tense, you put a kop at the beginning. To make a future tense, you take a bid and you put it at the beginning. All the rest of it is going to be exactly the same. All the endings, which I'm calling type A endings, and this is a good term to learn. This is just something particular to this book, but it's a useful way to think about things. There's two types of endings. There's type A, and then you already know the type B endings, which are the possessive pronouns we learned a few weeks ago. Those are going to be applicable in other places. So these type A endings, namely the noon at the end of the first person, the tau at the end of the second person, and so on, those are called the type A endings. Learn that and learn the sort of term type A ending. So future tense is the type A endings with bid. So let's take this verb to do, odin, wada. So to say I will do or I will make, bid odin for masculine. For feminine, bid odan. So again, let's review. If you want to say I make or I do present tense, you say koden, koden. Here, you get rid of that kop, you go back to the subjunctive, and you put a bid at the beginning. So bid odin, bid odan. You masculine, bid odit, bid odat. He will do, bid awith. She will do, bid oda. We will do, bid oduch. You plural will do, bid odutun. They will do, bid odi. If you know the endings, and if you learn the subjunctive and the present tense, like you were supposed to, this is basically nothing new. All you're learning here is just the idea that the bid indicates the future tense. If you haven't quite learned the endings, this is another opportunity to do so. There's really no escaping it. You just have to learn these forms. The endings, again, I repeat something I mentioned before. It's not just the endings, it's also the places where the vowels fall. So, au, then. So this pthaha on the first radical, this zlama on the third radical, all those placements need to be memorized as well. Again, you don't have to make it this sort of formal, the first radical has a pthaha and the third radical has a zlama. Get the sound of it, get the feel of them. When you put in other verbs into these patterns, it'll kind of sink in more and more. So there's a future tense conjugation. Again, we're doing a little bit of historical kind of exegesis here. The probable origin of bid as the tense indicator for the future is probably the combination of the words bathar and dich, which mean after which. So the word bathar means after. I think we actually saw that. And then dich, we already know, means after this or after something like this. So maybe where did bid come from? Maybe bathar dich odin became bid odin. Maybe that's one possibility. Note that the future tense particle bid is often shortened only to b. So here, this is a very important thing, and some dialects do this a little bit more than others, but you don't necessarily need to say all of bid odin. Some dialects will just say b'odin. Bid odin can just be shortened to b'odin, and so on with all of these. B'odin, bid awith, b'awith. Bid odi, b'odi. This is a totally legitimate way to speak. So you can also think of the bith alone as the future tense indicator when it's at the beginning. Okay. So it can be bid or it can be just the beth by itself. So that's the future tense, and that's it. There's another way to say the future, like I am going to. We're going to learn that in a much later chapter. If you've heard of Zielen, that's a different way to say the future. We'll learn that later. This is really the most grammatical way to say the future tense. Okay, let's talk about the perfect tenses. What is a perfect tense? A perfect tense indicates a completed action. So it can work as a kind of past tense. It's not the only way to make a past tense. It's a completed action. It's something that is done happening. So it's similar to a past tense. The perfect tenses utilize the tense indicator hua, which means was. So hua, we already learned it in a previous chapter. Hua means it was being a certain way. So this particle is added in the case of the present perfect to the end of the word. Okay, so here's the thing. So several tenses we've learned so far have a perfect version. So there's a present perfect. Let's learn this present perfect. What does it mean that there's a present perfect? It means you're speaking of something that is already done in a way that you're sort of describing the act as it was happening. So in English, the way we say it in English is I was doing. It's really interesting that in English and in Chaldean, things work almost exactly the same way. Doing, if you just look at the word doing by itself, it's kind of a present tense. I am doing. Okay, it's kind of a present tense form of the verb. But if you use the word was, it makes it into a perfect. This is exactly what the perfect looks like in English. So if you want to say I was doing, very much the same thing happens in Chaldean. Koden, I am doing. Wa means was. So I was doing. Koden wa. So koden wa, usually it's stressed here. Koden wa, I was doing. Koden wa, I was doing feminine. Kodetwa, you were doing masculine. Kodetwa, you feminine were doing. Kawithwa, kodawa, he and she. Koduchwa, we were doing. Kodutunwa, you were doing. Kodiwa, they were doing. What's new here? Nothing. You already know kap is the present tense indicator. You already know all these endings. These are all exactly what you've already learned. The only new thing here is that wa at the end changes the meaning to was doing. That's the only new thing here. And really a lot of the rest of the book is just going to be building on these little pieces that you've already memorized in the last chapter. So here is the present perfect conjugation. Wa, long story short, wa is the present perfect conjugation. Wa is the perfect indicator. And the kap is the present indicator. And the combination of them gives you the present perfect. There's also a future perfect. The future perfect is very rare in Chaldean, and it's very rare in English. I don't know if you may have never used the future perfect in English. I will have done. If you're writing a letter, by the time you receive this letter, I will have completed something. It's pretty rare in English, but we're just putting it here just for the sake of completion. So it's the same thing. You have the future indicator bid, and then you have wa. Bid odenwa, I will have done. Bid odenwa, feminine. Bid oditwa, bid odetwa, bid awithwa, bid odawa, bid oduchwa, bid odutunwa, bid odiwa. I wouldn't spend much time on this. It's a pretty rare thing to use, so just be familiar with it, be aware of it. Okay. This requires very little new memorization for the student since the verbal endings are identical to those in the subjunctive, namely the type A endings. Thus, the tenses that use these endings are the present, the future, and the present and future perfect. These are the ones that use these endings, these four tenses. The present tense, the subjunctive tense uses these endings, the future, the present, and the present perfect, and the future perfect. So 5 tenses use this pattern, this paradigm that you learned in the previous chapter. Now, the same patterns with little alteration apply also to the same tenses in the verb to be. Now let's go back to the verb to be, which is a little bit irregular it's a kind of extra weak verb because it has two weak letters, the waw and the alep. So if you want to say I will be, there are two different ways to pronounce this. I will be. You can say bid hawen. Should not be any surprise there, right? You already know hawen is the subjunctive of I, let me be, or I may be. Bid is the future indicator. Bid hawen. Now there's a sort of contracted way to say this. You can pronounce it ptawin. Bid hawen, bidhawen, ptawin. So you can say either one of these perfectly fine. Bidhawen, ptawin. Bidhoyan for the feminine, ptoyan. Bidhawit, ptawit. For you will be masculine. Bidhoyat, you feminine, ptoyat. Bidhawe, ptawe. Bidhoya, toya. So he will be and she will be. Again, these are not, you don't say both of these. These are just both options. You can say bidhawen or you can say ptawen. You can pick either one of these. We will be bidhauch or ptauch. You will be bidhawotun or ptawotun. They will be bidhawe or ptawe. I should say this, and then maybe I should have said this last chapter. There are some dialects that this particular form, in all these different conjugations we learned, bidhawuch, sometimes they'll use a different vowel here, bidhawich. They'll use a zlama here, bidhawich. This you'll hear very often, bid'odich instead of bid'oduch. I really should have said that last chapter, so my apologies to the villagers that speak in this way. Bidhawich, bidhawichwa, kodichwa. That's a perfectly valid, acceptable way to pronounce these. All the way through all of these type A endings. Everything that uses these type A endings, you can pronounce in this way. Note the shorter alternatives for future tense within the parentheses. Okay, I already talked about that. All right. For the present, so that's how you say I will be. This is the future tense of to be. If you want to say the present perfect, I was being. Maybe it's not the most common, but it's worth learning. You do exactly what you would guess. You take the kap, which is the present tense indicator. You take the verb, kawin, and then you put wa, which is the perfect indicator. So kawinwa, I was being, or I used to be, something like that. Koyanwa, I was being. Kawitwa, you were being, or you used to be. Koyetwa, you were being, feminine. Kawewa, or kawewa. You can put the vowel back on the kap if you want. Koyawa, he and she. Kawochwa, kawotunwa, you plural were being. Kawewa, they were being. So far, it seems pretty logical. There's something that's a little bit surprising here. There's a little bit of a glitch in the language. In addition, adding hua to the static present tense of the verb to be results in a past tense meaning. This is something that's just weird. You just have to learn this. If you want to say I was, you take, actually, no, sorry, this is not surprising at all. This is the surprising thing, the next thing down here. So let's just learn this. The past tense conjugation. You know it, you know Ewin. I am. If you take Ewin and then add the perfect indicator wa, it's win wa. You can say Ewinwa, perfectly valid to say Ewinwa. More often, you'll see it pronounced winwa. So Ewin is I am. Winwa is I was. Feminine, wanwa, Iwanwa or wanwa, I was. Witwa, Iwitwa or witwa, you masculine were. Watwa, Iwatwa or watwa, you were feminine. Wewa, he was. Wawa, she was. Wuchwa, we were. Iwuchwa or wuchwa. Wotunwa, you plural were. Wewa or wawa or weiwa. These are all, this one has a lot of alternate pronunciations. They were. Wewa. wa, way wa. Okay. Again, note the shorter alternate spellings. Finally, the future perfect. Is it finally? Yeah, good. Finally, the future perfect is formed as expected with the wa particle added to the end. Again, this is pretty rare. I wouldn't spend much time worrying about this. It's what you would expect. Bidhawin wa. Bidhawin. You can take bidhawin, I will be. Bidhawin wa, or ptawin wa. I will have been. I don't know how often that you would say that, but there it is. Bidhawin or ptawin wa. Bidhoyan wa or ptoyan wa. Bidhawit wa or ptoyat tawit wa. Bidhoyat wa. Sorry, bidhawit wa or tawit wa. Bidhoyat wa or ptoyat wa. Bidhawe wa, ptawe wa. Bidhoyawa, ptoyawa. Bidhawuchwa, tawuchwa. Bidhawotunwa, tawotunwa. Bidhawewa, tawewa. Don't stress about this one too much. It's pretty rare, but like I said, it's worth recognizing. Lots of new verbs for your vocab that you can practice these with. Basam, bsama, to heal. Barik, braka, to kneel. This is important that the kap at the end is hard. If you soften this to a ch, barik means to bless. Barik means to kneel. And burka is a knee, the thing that you kneel on. Jarah, jraha, a wound. This is a soft hath. Jarah, jraha, a wound. Sorry, to wound, not a wound, to wound. Jarah, jraha. Ghalat, ghlata, to err, to make a mistake. Gare, gra'a, to shave. Da'ach, da'acha, to turn off. This is for a thing to turn off. It doesn't mean to cause something to turn off. That's a different form. Khade, ghda'a, is to wrap something up. Ghda'a. Halim, hlama. Halim or khalam, you'll hear both of these pronunciations. To dream. And the word for dream is khulma. Khalim, khlama. It might be good to start recognizing nouns as they're related to verbs. Khapiq, khbaqa, to hug. Khashik, khshaka, to darken, for something to become dark. Khatim, khtama, to seal or finish. Tarid, trada, to drive away, to kick something out, somebody out. Tarid. Kanish, knasha, to sweep or assemble things together. Mashih, mshaha, to anoint. Nadhif, mvafa, to become clean. Sawe, swa'a, to be, to like be full at the end of a meal, to be satisfied. Saghid, sghada, to adore or worship. This can also mean to kneel down as well, but it's sort of kneeling down in worship. Sahad, shada, this means to witness or testify, but also means to be martyred. Amid, amada, to be baptized. There's another word for to baptize somebody else. We'll get to that in a few chapters. It's a form of this word. Palat, plata, to go out. There's a synonym for this called napiq and paqa. It's in another vocab somewhere. Paqid, qada, to command. Hathach, pthacha, that's a hard hith. Hathach, pthacha, to open. Qatil, qtala, you've seen this before, it's to kill. Rakhish, rakhasha, to walk or to creep around. Some nouns, alahutha, divinity. Raza is a mystery or the mass, like the sacrament of the mass. Athra is a land or a country. Baroya is the creator. Jirha is a cut. So here you have jarah, to wound. Jirha is a cut or a wound. Gushma is flesh or substance. Ghalta is a mistake. So here, ghalat is a mistake or is to make a mistake, to err. A mistake is ghalta. Dihna is oil. There's another word for oil, which is mishcha or mishha. These are all kind of sort of synonyms, but they're used in more particular ways. Chaye, life. Khamra is wine. These are both hard hayths. Kiana is nature. Kiana with a kap is nature. Gyana, you'll get in a different chapter, means the soul. Sora is hope. And then a couple adjectives. Alahaya is divine. So you know Alaha is God. Alahutha is divinity. Alahaya is divine. You see how they're related. Ar'anaya, you know Ar'a is earth. Ar'anaya is earthly. Bagranaya is bodily. You know Bagra is body. Bagranaya is bodily. Shmeyana, Shmeya is heaven. Shmeyana is heavenly. Here's your exercise. Conjugate 10. I don't know, that's going to be tiring maybe, but actually I'm having you conjugate 30 times here. That's kind of a lot, but pick a handful at least of these new vocab words and conjugate them in, some of these new tenses that you learned. Some nice translations you can do and some active translation into Chaldean, and then write a little story. I don't know, a 10-sentence Chaldean dialogue between two people, utilizing all the material, as much of the material as you can from chapters 1 through 6. This is actually fun to do if you get into it. You're gonna have some fun with this, enjoy using these vocab words. If you want to look for another word, there's dictionaries in both directions at the end of the book. If you want to look up an English word, you can do that in one part of the dictionary. If you heard a Chaldean word and you don't know what it is, you can look it up in the other part of the dictionary. So you can use some dictionary words if you want for your stories. Okay, good luck. I will see you next class.